Alrighty, welcome back everybody to this new episode of Mood Forward with Cameron County. And our special guest in the house tonight is Mr. Luis Villarreal. He is running for state representative for House District 37. Everybody give a warm welcome to Mr. Luis Villarreal. Luis, glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Mr. Salinas. I appreciate the opportunity.
Great. It's great to have you. Could you talk a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, what made you decide to run, and what are some of the issues that you care about?
So first of all, my name is Luis Villarreal. I was born and raised here in the RGV. I was raised in Brownsville, went to BISD schools. Um, I graduated from high school, went to college, went to UTRGV, got two bachelor's and a master's. After that, I went and worked for the state. I worked for the state for 7 years. Um, and after my time there, which I enjoyed very much, I did case management and I left as director of administration. So I have experience in the Capitol. I was there for three legislative sessions and helped pass many wonderful pieces of legislation for the area for the local state senator. Um, After that, I stepped down and I opened my business. Uh, I guess not luckily for me, I opened my business basically a year before COVID. I've been in business, and then my second year in business was the best business school anybody could attend, right? COVID and hopefully and thankfully survived that. We're still obviously recuperating from as a business and as a society as well from those challenges, especially myself and my business and ensuring that I make payroll every month as at the time, even currently we have over 300 employees in my company and we're still, going forward providing services across the valley. Um, and to tell you more about me, during my time in the legislature, I think some of the areas that I focused on was transportation. Additional to that, I actually staff Ports Committee in the Texas Senate. I did some light health and human services and state affairs. So I'm pretty well roundabout. I also did Senate finance. So I'm very knowledgeable on riders, the budgetary process, and how, passing a bill is part A, but if your bill has any funding allocations, you still need to go to the budgetary process. There's many cases that people do not know is that a bill passes, but if the corresponding rider or additional funding legislation does not get into the budget, you just pass a legislation with no money. Because it doesn't matter how much money it takes if you don't actually put that money in the budget. So I'm pretty well rounded. As a businessman here in Harlingen, I moved to Harlingen 4 years ago when I opened my
Okay.
business here in Harlingen. And It's been a great experience for me to be here in Harlingen. I've been able to grow as a businessman, and the community accepted me with open arms. I didn't move that far from Brownsville, right? But it was a nice welcome here. I've been able to do a couple of property developments in the area, and as any good developer would know, drainage has been a major issue, right? And I myself was affected by it as one of my buildings had water in the last major rain. It wasn't even a hurricane, but it was a major rain, right?
Hmm.
And we had to do some extensive rehabbing due to the water getting into the building. Thankfully, there's insurance, but not everybody is prepared for those things or can afford the financial, burden of, fixing that up. Because still, your business still stops operating, right? So, additional to that, like everybody else here in the valley, we had the freeze, and we saw the necessity to address infrastructure problems not only in drainage, but in the power grid, right? And I've had some experience with that due to my personal background, business background. So I helped develop the Mahadas Wind Farm here in Williston County, which is now owned by ADF. We did some of the land work and right away for that, and we're happy to say that the project was finished in 2020, and we did pretty well. And the project still operating today is was one of the largest renewable energy projects in the area. Even though I paid a small role, right, we still paid a part on that, and I understand some of those concerns. everybody talks today, and it's very good that we talk about building, wind farms and solar farms and all of these renewable sources. But the main issue that we face today, it's not even the production, it's getting the production to point A to point B.
Right.
Transmission lines is not something that is cool to talk about, but it's something that we need to talk about because, to give you an idea, today, ERCOT has curtailed a lot of the local producers here in the valley. So many of these wind farms are not even able to sell their power because there's not enough capacity in the power line to send that up north or to move it up to the markets that need it.
Mm-hmm.
So these wind farms locally are not producing at 100% because they can't sell the product because
Wow.
the valley is already getting all the energy it needs. Now the extra capacity on these wind farms are just not being sold. They told them you cannot sell more than X amount into the grid, so they're not producing 100%.
Wow.
So that, alongside education, which is also a vital issue, everybody needs an education. But I think that I myself was one of those, I had a wonderful opportunity that I had a middle class family, right? And I went to school. I'm dyslexic, had a couple of challenges, but I had a mother who was extremely persistent,
Mm-hmm.
who stayed up to 10, 11, 12 at night with me to do my homework and it was challenging. And I was also in ESL, so English as a second language. I remember my mom was telling me that she laughed the first day I got back from school because she asked me how it went, and I was like, "Well, mom, I mean, it went well, but the teacher doesn't know how to talk because I didn't know English. My family does not at the time. My parents did not know English, and everything I learned at home was Spanish,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I learned through the process." And I also understand the importance of having bilingual teachers in the classroom, which is also a challenge, and ensuring that the teachers get proper pay. But beyond that, the student, right now you graduate from high school and you cannot do very much with that degree, right? As you know, right? Everybody wants you to have a college degree or certification. So I think that the fundamental method in which we educate today needs to change so that when you graduate from high school, you have a certifications because certifications today are what get you employed.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to go work at HR, they want you to be SHRM certified. If you want to go work as a welder, you need to have a welder certification. You want to do you want to be, if you want to be a truck driver, you need a CDL,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think some of the courses that could be taught in high school need to be focused to career-driven options in which if you graduate from high school, you're able to get a job. Because remember, I think, and I can't recall the rates right now, but about 50% of the people who do go to college end up dropping out.
Right.
And we need to ensure that they have a skill that's going to help them in life.
Yeah.
And the only way we do that is if we focus our education system for the private sector, not to put them in a slave, a life of servitude to this is no, but to give them an opportunity. There's a lot of people who say, "Oh, you just want them to do this, and they won't go to college because they're making money now." No, what I'm saying is give them an option. You want to become an electrician apprentice, you could be making, $15, $20 an hour helping an electrician instead of doing something else
Right.
that doesn't pay as much and
Right.
that you don't have those skills,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's a big change that needs to happen, in my opinion, in the education system that is not really, I'm setting you on a career path when you're 12 and you have no idea what's going to happen. It's more like I'm giving you a skill that if you go to college, you get a job in and work at that while you're getting your degree.
Yeah.
Because myself, I worked through college,
Yeah.
and I did. Thankfully, I was a SI leader, supplementary instructor. But there's many other people that did different jobs, and that could have been making a little bit more if they graduated from high school with a certification in something,
Yeah.
and a simple job that they could do part time. Because
Right.
if you go work anywhere today, I think beyond a bachelor's degree, they want a certification degree.
Yeah.
They want a certification in something that specializes you in something.
Right.
At least that's what I've noticed in the work environment today.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about education. I mean, obviously, there's a couple of topics we'll talk about. Yeah. I mean, one of the things today about education, and we've seen it over the last couple of years, is what I call the poaching of students from regular public school into these charter schools. And obviously, anytime a public school loses students, they lose funds associated to attendance. And the charter schools obviously are taking advantage of this situation. And as a result of that, they're claiming that, they've got higher rates of graduation. I'm not really sure if that's really true with regards to graduation rates or star test rates, but we've definitely seen an exodus from the public school system into the charter school system. What can we do at that level to ensure that our public schools are adequately maintained with regards to funding, and that somehow there seems to be an equitable approach between dividing the baby between the public school system and the charter school system? What's your take on that?
So that's a great issue to bring up. The reality of the case is that I believe that if we're talking about public education, it's also very important to say that a charter school and a public school are a public school for starters because they both get public funding.
They do.
So that the what I my opinion there is that sorry, thank you. My opinion there is I'm sorry.
That's all right.
My opinion there is that the parent charter schools is something that was created and that today are they're going to be here to stay. They're not going anywhere.
Yes.
They were created today, and I think that the important thing is that all schools, no matter public or charter, have the same reporting and the same standards.
Right.
Because more than anything, they're using public funds and they both have to be held accountable equally across the board.
Right.
That's number one. And I believe there's maybe some work to be done there. Number two, I believe that the parent overall has a choice. If the parent is moving the kid from that public school over to a charter school, it must be for a reason, right?
Yeah.
And we need to ensure that public schools are also responsive to that reason. A parent doesn't just move a kid because they want to. They move a kid because an issue, either bad recommendations from parents that have gone to that school. So it's also important to know that it's not the kid doesn't choose to go to charter schools. The parents choose to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important and just like they went to a charter school, a kid could choose to go from a charter school back into a public school if the charter school is not doing a good job.
Right.
So I think it's very important that, we're responsible to parents.
Yeah.
And parents that do that move are doing it for a reason. And we can't take that option. That option was put on the table when charter schools were created. Now we need to live with that option and ensure that everybody pays the same ground rules. In my opinion, what matters is whatever school gets state funding or federal funding follows the same reporting requirements across the board. And that is my view on that issue.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can't have a lopsided system, be it towards the charter schools or be it to the public schools.
Right.
It has to be fair and equitable.
Yeah. With regards to energy, I know you talked a lot about that, earlier here when we started. What do you think we need to do to ensure that we prevent a freeze that causes, unfortunately, people to lose lives? We lost power. I personally lost power for about 4 days, and it was hell. It was hell. I mean, it was cold. We had no power. We were basically charging our phones from our cars and so forth. But what can we do? I mean, one of the things that I read about is that there's only 3 grids in the entire country. There's the East Coast grid, the West Coast grid, and for whatever reason, Texas has its own grid. But obviously, it failed us back in, February of 2021 or so?
Yes.
What do you think needs to be done to prevent something like that from happening again? Number 2, ensuring that we never have a loss of life ever again. Nobody should die because their electricity wasn't on. And third, what can we do to upgrade our infrastructure with regards to energy? And fourth, do you believe that it is time to demand a uh, a reshuffling of ERCOT and ERCOT's management and making them more accountable?
So I want to start with that that's a great first step, the reshuffling of ERCOT. ERCOT has to be held accountable. The people who sit there need to be replaced with qualified individuals. That's number one. Number two is, as you know, Texas has its own grid, and that comes from, the Lone Star State, being that we were a nation before, and we want to be independent and free from the rest. But I believe personally, and I don't have anything to quote, that one of the reasons that our grid is separate from the rest is because Texas wanted to have its own grid, number one, but number two, did not want to do the infrastructure requirements and upgrades that it had to do to actually be part of the national grid. The national grid has higher standards. If you operate in the national grid, you're required to have all these, winterization upgrades that now we're requiring. But back in the day, that's something that the national government did, right? That regulated all that area, and the state decided not to because it would have been a burden to the energy producers, which I believe is not correct because it is a public good. Energy is something that everybody requires, especially in time of winter, right? I think to prevent something from happening like this ever again, I'll tell you that that's basically impossible to do. Uh,
Right.
you see California, they're in the national grid and they have blackouts due to power demands. I think we are, natural disasters are always going to happen, but we need to be prepared for those. And I'll tell you the case of Texas, we were not prepared because they didn't do the investment for winterization in these plants. You know, that is some that's number one, right? Number two, we need to make something in the system that helps us move energy more efficiently. I already know this, but I mentioned the curtailment of energy production here in the valley. But if I remember correctly, during the freeze, the wind farms were only selling 20% of its output, meaning that there was 80% that was offline that they couldn't just bring online overnight because it was a freeze happening. But if let's say that 80% was online, we probably would have never suffered any power loss because the wind farms here were still spinning in the freeze.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that was not the cause for the power outages, as we all know now. It's the natural gas and all those issues. But if we had our wind farms producing at 100%, we probably would have not felt it. We
Mm-hmm.
probably would have been okay. I think transmission lines, and I know it's not cool to say transmission lines because it's just things you see, but that's the most effective way because sometimes what happens a lot is that there's a lot of power in this corner of the state, but you can't get it to this corner. And in the business sector, they do power swaps. So and virtually, okay, I'll buy that energy and I can do this over here. But in real life, if you don't have connection from here to here, you're not going to get it, right?
Right.
So what happens is that we need to build more infrastructure when it comes to transmission lines. We need to deregulate or reduce regulations on the process to put energy transmission lines throughout the state of Texas to ensure energy goes from A to B and to ensure that this doesn't happen again at the scale that it happened, most importantly, because I believe if the proper investment is happening and the private market sees it, private market is seeing that energy is becoming a scarce resource and they're building wind farms left and right and solar farms left and right. However, if that farm cannot get its goods, or in this case, electricity out to the grid, it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can put all the wind farms and all the solar farms you want, but if there's no transmission line capacity to move it down or connecting the system equitably and fairly in which it could balance the loads, this is will happen again.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, no system is foolproof, but if you have a system that's well interconnected, you can prevent this from happening again.
With regards to the wind farms, the ones that are around the area out by Los Fresnos and further up in Willacy County, who do those wind farms generate electricity for? Is it for the locals or is it for someone else?
So there's something called power purchase agreements, PPAs. These power purchase agreements are done, let's say Google buys it or all these other people buy it, and they come with these tax credits. So all this energy is pre-sold, right? Give you an example. PUB probably has power purchase agreements with other producers across the strait. They're basically saying that X number of power I'm going to utilize, right? However, that power still needs to get there. So that's where transmission lines come into play, right? But these are PPAs, power purchase agreement. You don't get to choose where the electricity goes, right? Google doesn't use all the electricity it bought from a plant that they bought or they built. No, they do a power swap. So the energy is produced here, right? And they trade that energy for energy wherever the location is at. That's what I was talking about, energy swaps that in the last section. Basically, I buy power here and I swap it for power generated somewhere else. But
Right.
this is my power. So they sell that to somebody else that needs it locally, right?
Okay.
So it's called power swaps. So yeah, some of that energy stays here because it can be transferred up. It can be transferred up north because obviously it's curtailment. But a lot of the times, power, you can't direct power. You can, it just kind of goes into the grid and it diffuses through the lines. But you could, on the other side, in the private sector, then in the trading floors, they swap. Okay, I need this over here and I need this over here. So in essence, the power produced at the wind farms is used locally, but it was not purchased for that specific purpose. It was probably a swap somewhere or something
Okay.
like that.
All
Yes,
right.
it's more complicated than what it seems.
All right. Well, one of the other things that I wanted to touch a little bit, we'll just revert back a little bit to education slightly. And I know we talked about public education, but let's talk a little bit about with regards to additional funding for our local community colleges and universities. I know that there's been some great strides, especially at UTRGV, with trying to provide free tuition for people under a certain income bracket. There's a lot of people that unfortunately don't qualify for financial aid. They're either make too much money and they can't apply for a Pell Grant, but they don't make enough money to cover the cost of education. I mean, the average cost, I think I read somewhere, is about $9,000 here at UTRGV, and it obviously increases throughout the state depending on the school, which kind of makes higher education a little unattainable for that income bracket. What at the state level can we do? I mean, I know that, there are people that are for against free tuition for the first 2 years of college and so forth. But what can we do at the state level, or what do you intend to do at the state level should you get elected to try to address the continued increases in the cost of higher education, and what can we do to provide additional tuition relief to that income bracket that is not too poor to qualify for a Pell Grant, but not rich enough to pay it on their own?
I think what's happening today with that is it's incredible news because, like you said, there's many people who just don't qualify or do not qualify, but don't have the financial capacity once they don't qualify for the program to actually go to college. It's a difficult, difficult task. And I think what they're doing is great. I think the reality of the case is someone will eventually pay for it, right?
Yeah.
So as a state legislator, uh, you have to allocate funds. And usually what happens is that the state directly allocates funds to these local universities and I think what the most important thing is, especially as a state representative from this area, we need to fight with a valley delegation strongly to bring more money down to UTRGV because the more money that comes from the state down to UTRGV is the less cost they need to charge the student at the other side,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's extremely important because if we do not effectively do that, all we're going to do is increase tuition. So we need to make sure that all valley legislators do that because someone is going to pay for it eventually. It's not free tuition; it's subsidized tuition through somebody somewhere providing the funding to do
Right.
that. And I think it's great. It's free tuition to the student, but for the legislator, for the elected official that represents the state, that is basically bucket of money here, bucket of money here. How do we move it over? Right. So as a legislator, my job is going to ensure that first of all, UTRGV invest fair and equitably in the valley, ensure that Cameron County gets its fair share of, professors and education and programs. That's number one. Number two is that the money that UTRGV gets is also shared equally between the valley because you see a lot of this development, and I know UTRGV has been growing here in Cameron and it's doing a good job, but I think growth could be bigger and growth could be better. We're very happy they just opened the new high school here with UTRGV, and you have the neuroscience program open here in Harlingen. We've done great strides, but we need to continue fighting to ensure that Cameron County, especially my district, Harlingen, Raymondsville, Port Isabel, Laguna Vista, Los Fresnos get their fair share and ensure that investment from UTRGV happens here in this area. Because a professor living in Harlingen spends money in Harlingen. So we need to ensure that the money gets invested here too.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about job creators, and I want to focus specifically on companies that have recently moved to the area. They're providing jobs. A lot of times with salaries over $15 an hour. I think you're familiar with one of them that resides down on Boca Chica. There's a lot of controversy with regards to that company. There are people obviously very passionate about the environment. But I think what I've seen over the last year or so is that passion turned into outright hostility. And the question is, what can we do to maintain a positive atmosphere when it comes to not scaring some of these companies away, whether we're out there protesting or filing lawsuits? I mean, I understand, that there's concerns about the beach and the environment, the turtles and the alligators, but, uh, this area needs jobs and we need high paying jobs. And do you believe that we can find a balance between uh, these environmental groups and corporate America? I mean, SpaceX, for example, is a huge company. We're on the verge of either keeping them or losing them because of an FAA license agreement. So, do you think we can somehow come to a balance where we can equally address some of the issues that the environmentalists ask about and of course the needs of companies such as SpaceX?
So I'll start with the FFA license agreement. I think this primary that we saw recently, we saw that we elected Vicente Gonzalez, and I think the candidate that was the most qualified got elected. He has seniority already, even though he's moving from a neighboring district. So I feel comfortable saying that our hopefully future elect candidate that he's going to win the district. It has the manpower and the political guns to ensure that FFA license goes through. I think that if we would have had any freshmen go in, I would be a little nervous because with experience and tenure comes power, right? And I believe Vicente Gonzalez will ensure that we get that license because of his tenure there. He's, like everybody else, you trade votes and you do things throughout your political lifetime there in the capital that I'm pretty sure will give him a leverage to get whatever he needs to ensure that license comes in. That's number one, in my personal opinion. Number two is that there needs to balance need to be reached, and it may not be the 50-50, but what I want to say is that, Elon Musk is a leader in renewable. It's beyond SpaceX and Tesla. He had Solar City, which he included that he merged with Tesla because they went into bankruptcy. And he's a leading in battery storage, which helps reduce carbon footprint. He's leading in electric vehicles, which help reduce our reliance on hybrids like gasoline and diesel. And he's already doing a lot. Maybe SpaceX is not as environmentally friendly as Tesla per se, but I think that as a person that he is today, that he's shown with his companies, he's somebody that's environmentally conscious of what's going on. And like everything in life, there's wins and there's winners and losers, and there's gives and takes. You can't win everything, right?
Right.
And you can't get everything. You can't be 100% environmentally friendly and do business because even if you build a house out there, you're hurting the environment, right?
Right.
Just to go to that extreme. And obviously, this is different. These are rockets that are throwing fuel in the air and everything. It's a whole. but there is a balance. That is
Right.
an industry that's going to go up here or somewhere else. And
Right.
I believe, based on our job market, we need them because we do. I mean, it's hard to say that we need a person, right? But we need a leader like Elon Musk here to do this investment because all the surrounding industry and investment that comes with it. I mean,
Right.
think about it. There are support industries across the board that they rely on, and they're bringing money to trucking companies to bring cargo in and out, the
Right.
port to bring parts in. I think the balance will be reached. I think that maybe, in my opinion, SpaceX may need to do a little bit more PR, hire a better person to explain and show what they're doing, and showing that they're actually doing something about it. And sometimes it takes a little marketing.
Yeah.
I'm sure he knows what he's doing, and they're doing all the environmental things correctly. And I trust our agencies and the EPA, the FAA to ensure that whatever is built with the understanding of the environment today.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure he himself, based on his track record and his other companies, that he is going to do what's environmentally conscious, but also cost effective. You can't expect someone to do something that's going to break the bank either, but ensure that he does the best he can within the resources he has.
Right. Well, that's one of the things that I've argued for, and I have these conversations quite a bit. That, especially today, we have got a serious situation where, for many years after the shuttle was retired, we depended on the Russians to actually take our astronauts and our cargo to the space station. And we paid millions of dollars to the Russians for them to turn around and upgrade their military so that they could turn around 10 years or 12 years later and invade a country and cause all kinds of genocide. It was shameful for us to rely on them. And so I think right now, whether some folks like it or not, SpaceX is the only company that can right now ferry our astronauts and our cargo to the space station. There is no other company. Jeff Bezos' company can't do it, and NASA and Boeing can't seem to get their own rocket up and running. So we've got the only thing we have is SpaceX right now, and in my opinion, it's not just jobs that we have to focus on. The people down here at Boca Chica are doing the research, the development, and the construction to ensure that this country maintains its technological edge in space. Because the last thing we want to do, in my opinion, is rely on the Russians or the Chinese to take us. When we landed on the moon over 50 years ago, it's just not right. It's just not right. So, I agree with you. There has to be a balance. And if there is a gripe, it's not about opening up a can of spray paint and going and painting a mural downtown because SpaceX donated money. You want to run. You have a gripe. You run for office and try to make a change. You don't do it with a spray can, of paint. So that's my take on it. But
But I think
go
I want
ahead.
to add something real quick. I think this war that's going on between Ukraine and Russia has been more bearable for the U.S. because we're no longer reliant on them to take our astronauts out there.
Right.
Say whatever you want to say, but I think about the U.S. Relying on them. But the U.S. was smart and eventually allowed SpaceX to start getting these contracts and get that capacity.
Right.
Because without the federal contract, SpaceX would have never built what it built today.
Right.
Elon Musk is a wealthy man, but nobody has billions upon billions to throw into a
Right.
project to do it for fun.
Right.
So I think thanks to Elon, we're able to feel comfortable knowing that the space station won't fall out of the sky because Russia will no longer ferry people up there or equipment.
Right. Which is very incredible that they even went ahead and made that threat. I think they thought
Yeah.
that making the threat they would scare us, but obviously we've got our backup plan, which is a good thing. So let's talk a little bit about. And by the way, I actually have two podcasts. I have this one, and I have a podcast called Brownsville Tech Live. And
Hmm.
I had one of our city commissioners on last night, And Brownsville is taking the lead here on building a fiber network through the funds associated with the American Rescue Plan. And as one of the things that we discovered last year when it came to infrastructure was the lack of internet. People had to stay home, they had to isolate. They found out that their internet was slow. I mean, a lot of our kids were issued these little devices, and to be honest with you, they're not the greatest devices. They're pretty slow and unreliable. So, what can we do at the state level to be more supportive, not just of the Valley, but in rural Texas in general, to ensure that we expand our internet coverage so that, God forbid, if we ever have another pandemic where everybody has to stay home and work from home, that there's the necessary infrastructure in place so that our kids are able to go to school virtually and their parents are able to work from home. What do you think the state needs to do with regards to additional funding for ensuring that we've got reliable internet access, not just here in the Valley, but across the state?
So that's a really good question. You're asking some, that was actually, if you know a little bit more about the subject, that's a tough question. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Because when I was working at the state, I worked with the city of FAR, and the city of FAR is taking it 3 steps further than the city of Brownsville is doing. The city of FAR has, I think they're about to finish, laid about $40 million worth of fiber in your city, from corner to corner, connected all through fiber, and are providing internet 100 megabytes up and down, if I'm not mistaken, for $5 a month
Really?
to its entire citizens, right? And I think that they have the tools and they have the smarts to do it themselves, and they've been doing it themselves, which is incredible. However, I believe there's a lot of, there's that private partnership and private investment model, right? Because remember, it's easy for a city to go and do this with federal money, but you have to remember that there's people out there like SmartCom, Spectrum, Comcast, all of these people, AT&T, that have already invested a lot of money in this. And if the city does it, it's affecting them, right? Because the city doesn't have to make money, but they do. They have investors and stakeholders. So I believe it's a thing of finding that delicate balance. But if a city's going to go all in, they need to be ready for it. Because remember, the system is not just putting the system, you have to maintain it, call centers to ensure support service, all of this other stuff. So I think that, this is private partnerships are important. I think it's very important that the cities, especially if an area in your city is not getting access, that you put the infrastructure. However, those conversations have to be decided at a local level, city by city, to ensure, how you're going to do it. Are you going to decide and do the internet 100% on your own, like the city of FAR? Or are you going to do a public-private partnership in which you lay the infrastructure and you get a fee, but AT&T services it, right? Those are the difficult questions. There's no doubt about it that we need to do the investment, that the lines need to be put in. That's no doubt about it. However, who manages the system and who operates it, that's where the difficult questions lie. And I could tell you right now that that is, that's a road that's going to be difficult to go down through, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's real easy to say, well, we're going to connect all these houses. You're running this fiber optic and putting all the equipment. Well, who's going to run it? Who's going to operate it? Are you going to sell the infrastructure to the private entity? Are you going to rent it? Are they going to manage it? And those are the difficult conversations that I think need to be had, and they need to be addressed because, like I said, what if you're putting fiber in an area where AT&T already has fiber? Now you're competing with a private company with public funds. Those are the difficult conversations that will eventually come up, that I think you have to have somebody qualified to be involved and legislate. And I think I know a little bit more about this than most people, but I'm barely scratching the surface. This is like the tip of the iceberg, because laying the infrastructure, in my opinion, is the easy part.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else, it's extremely complicated. But one thing I'm sure of, that we need to keep allocating funds to ensure that all neighborhoods have access to this type of infrastructure across the board. Now, the operation of who is going to operate it, I cannot give you that answer because that's a difficult one, because the city is putting $50 million, but does not have the ability to operate it, maybe, or they do, but do they want to take that? Do they want to compete against Spectrum? Do they want to compete against AT&T? Do they want to compete against these people? I mean, these are really difficult questions that often get forgotten and put on the side.
Hmm. Hmm. Let's talk a little bit, kind of related in a way, and I kind of put the example up, but do you think we need to do a better job not only at the state level but at the local school level uh, when it comes to facing situations like pandemics, like we had the last 2 years? And there was a lot of controversy. I mean, there's people that wanted kids in school in the middle of a pandemic, and there were some that parents that didn't want to put their kids in school. They wanted a virtual education, but it seemed like we stumbled and ran over potholes along the way to try to provide virtual education. Uh, Partly because we had never done it before. We'd never faced something like this in like 100 years, right? And there was no internet back when the last pandemic was around. But it was awfully slow and painful for school districts, for teachers, for parents, and for kids to either send their kids to school or do virtual. And you heard the different arguments. Oh, kids aren't doing their homework, they're not doing their schoolwork, kids need to be in school, blah 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 blah. you know but I'll be honest with you, I was one of those parents that was very skeptical about sending my daughter back to school because obviously there was no guarantees that she, in my opinion, she was going to be safe, that they were going to do the temperature checks, that they were going to do the masking. And quite honestly, if you were at least alive and on Facebook, you saw that the districts weren't doing what they were supposed to do with temperature checks. I mean, you saw videos and pictures of kids still crammed in there. And so the idea of putting my child back in to physical school was a big deal for me because I just didn't feel they were adequate. But I mean, what's your take? What can we do at a state level to ensure that there are enough of these or enough of the technology so that, God forbid, if should a pandemic ever occur again, that we are able to shift pretty quickly into a virtual environment? Because some of our teachers weren't even properly trained on how to PowerPoint or Zoom or do Microsoft Teams. It was like going from the Stone Age to the high tech age. And I mean, what's your take on that? I mean, what can we do in the future to better prepare ourselves for the next pandemic? Because it's not a matter of if we're going to have a pandemic, it's a matter of when we're going to have a pandemic.
So I think like we've learned a lot. Start with that. We have learned a lot, and we've seen what work and hasn't worked. I think that today, uh, something that may be implemented, and I think let's start with this. I could think and believe many things, but I think that what I think does not matter because at the end of the day, the teacher's the one doing it. So I think that a lot of people thought and have a lot of great ideas that, like an idea that I was about to say right now. But the reality is, I'm not the teacher, right? And I think that now that teachers are back at school, that they maybe should be surveyed and asked what worked, what didn't work, what was good, what didn't work, and based on their answers, and see what worked on their opinion, because they're the teacher at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You know, me from up here looking at the classrooms, like, oh, it's that, but I was not there, right? And only the teacher that was there will know, right? So I think by surveying them and seeing what worked and what didn't work, and you get the top answers per se, this software or this or that, and then you implement that permanently into the curriculum to ensure
Right.
maybe one day out of the week or something, the teacher teaches a class through the computer, and you do a computer day
Yeah.
so that it's not foreign to the kid to actually be in the computer for a day working all day. So
Right.
maybe you take a day out of the class, a day out of the week based on based on what the teacher wants,
Yeah.
and you do all computer assignments.
Yeah.
So they get used to using the computer on a daily basis,
Yeah.
right? No, in classroom is just all through the computer,
Yeah.
right? Using the software, the top software the teachers decided per se,
Yeah.
so that the kids are already trained. Because it doesn't matter, the teacher may not know how to use a computer, but maybe the student does not know how to use a
Yeah.
computer. It's a lot easier to teach a teacher than to teach a student that's at
Yeah.
home
Yeah.
by himself, who you might be 5 years old and barely knows how to open the computer, or eight, I don't know. It's very challenging. So maybe you do a virtual day. But again, the teachers may be hearing me right now and be like, this guy has no idea what he's saying, right? But and that's okay,
Yeah.
because I'm not a teacher, and I
Yeah.
am not going to go dictate to a teacher what needs to be done. And that's why I think my first suggestion
Yeah.
is to ask the teachers what worked, what didn't work,
Yeah.
and based on what the teachers answered, implement that one day out of the week, so the students are already accustomed to that.
Yeah. Let's talk on one final area, and it's a topic that I've kind of meshed together. It's actually two topics, but I've asked every candidate for the most part regards to that. I think the only ones I have not asked are the JP's candidates that have appeared on my show, because they're a little different. Their position's a little different from, but it's regards to immigration, but not just immigration, but also that relationship that we have with Mexico, and the need to maintain that friendship with Mexico. I mean, I know the last couple of years has been tough, especially with obviously the violence that originally occurred in Mexico, and then of course the pandemic, and then the influxes from Central America, primarily El Salvador and Nicaragua, and those places. Um, what can we do at the state level to try to somehow make some kind of impact on the immigration problem? But at the same time, what can we do to maintain and nurture that relationship with Mexico? I mean, after all, they're our largest trading partner. You know, it's not like we can just build walls and borders with our largest trading partner. What do you think we need to do that we haven't done up to this point?
So, as you know, the state has very limited power on this. I'll tell you the one thing that we are doing, and we're spending a lot of money for border security. The Lone Star operation, I think up to now, cost $2 billion. And I am not disagreeing that we do not, I'm not disagreeing in saying that we do not need extra security. Maybe we do. I'm not there. I would have to ask Border Patrol agents, which I've met some of them, I've talked to them and listened to some of their concerns, but I'm not running for federal office. So it's not an open conversation that I have with them,
Right.
and get to know. But I actually own some land next to the river in
Yeah.
Brownsville that's used for farming. And, I dove hunt there. And I have a liaison because I'm a property owner, and I talk to the gentleman. He tells me, there's issues, right? And what I want to say, that the state is spending money, and what I say in that is, maybe they do need extra help, but that needs to be paid by the federal government, because the state of Texas is subsidizing border security for the rest of the country,
Right.
right? Those $2 billion shouldn't be coming out of our pockets only, Texas pockets,
Right.
right? They should be coming from everybody's pockets, meaning
Right.
California residents, Ohio residents, Denver residents. I don't care, everyone, right? And right now, the main issue I have with the state is that Texas are paying for border security. I'm not saying it's not needed. All I'm saying is that we should be paying for that additional supplementation. Should be being paid by the federal government,
Yeah.
right? That's number one. I think number two is we need to ensure that the people who come over, you know, have a place to be and stay and play an active part in the community. The reality is we have a worker shortage, and I wish the state could do something about it, but we can't. It has to be done at the federal level. But what's an easy way to fill worker shortages? Providing visas to qualified individuals who are in other countries to come and fill those positions. And there's nobody here locally who wants to do that job, because there's many, as you know, right now, I'll tell you, I have problems staffing up, right, in my company. And there's nobody that could qualify the job. Maybe offer visas and create a program in which you're able to bring somebody qualified for X number of months and make them, they're making a lot more money than what they make in their country. Maybe they go back. I do not know, right? But what I'll tell you is that I don't believe the state should spend any money on the border issue, the border security, because that's us taking on a federal responsibility. And I already pay my federal income taxes. I'm already paying my fair share. They shouldn't be taking my sales tax money or whatever revenue source the state gets their money from, that additional to sales tax and property tax, to provide additional security, because that should be coming from my federal taxes, not from our Texas dollars. And that's where my issue with the state's involvement is that we're providing a subsidy to the federal government. And if anything, the government should be giving us money.
Yeah, back, I believe it was in February when I had Mr. Carlos Cascos on the podcast. And, as you know, he is the former Cameron County judge, a two-term judge in the past, and he served as Texas Secretary of State. And that was one of this question, or this subject was one of the areas that we talked about. And specifically with regards to the border wall, his position was that he felt that Texas should not concentrate on building a physical border wall, but that efforts should be made to encourage Mexico to actually build a wall on their southern border to prevent that migration from actually spilling into Mexico. Because, while we focus here on immigration and the migrants that end up here, there is a certain period of time that they end up in Mexico, at some tent city somewhere, taking up resources as well. So, should we encourage Mexico to look at building some kind of barrier on their southern border instead of us spending millions of dollars here on our border, building a
So,
wall on our border?
no, I agree. That's something that we should encourage the Mexican government to do. That's something that they need to take care of, because just as we have, remember, some a car crisis, an issue, whatever you want to denominate it, all of that goes through Mexico before it gets here,
Right.
right? So as far as how do you do that, I do not know. I know the U.S. sends money over to Mexico like it do to many countries for help and assistance,
Yeah.
but that's really, like I said, it's a federal issue, and I wish I had more content knowledge on this to give you an educated answer. But what I do know is that currently today we need laborers, we need individuals capable of taking on jobs and willing to work. And I believe that a good way to address those issues, including teacher shortages, is by providing maybe visas to individuals who are qualified and have the job requirements to take on those jobs.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, there are some very qualified people around the world that could come here and take those opportunities and do a good job at it. As far as a physical barrier, I cannot. I apologize. I have no contact knowledge of the border with Mexico, with its neighboring country down in the south. So
But
I,
do you
I
believe
can't.
that it's a smart thing for us to continue this Trump era idea of a physical wall here in Texas? Do you really think it's going to serve its purpose, or do you think it's just a waste of money?
I think that a physical barrier is a physical barrier that you could climb over it. There's ladders, there's many things. There's open, it's not a solid barrier. They could go around it.
Right.
I believe it may not be the best thing, right, to be out there. I think that border walls are not great. There used to be a wonderful golf field here in Fort Brown that went out of business after the border wall was put up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that took it out of business, right? I think that the border wall has caused many individuals to be, put out of business, and a lot of people live in no man's land, what they call it, that live behind the wall, that affected them financially, depreciating their land values, right? Because it lives behind the border wall, right? So I think that it may not be a good idea. I believe that Border Patrol knows what's best, and we need to follow what Border Patrol sees on the ground. And sometimes a barrier is what they need, and that's what you need to give them. But it goes back to, I think government needs to be better at listening to its employees. In the case of school districts, listening to the teachers. In the case of border security, listening to the border patrol agents, because they know what's best. They may say a wall works here, but cameras work better over here. But a lot of these decisions are being made up there. And those people up there have taken 2 tours of the border. That's the only time they've ever been at the border, right? Probably never even seen the river, right? And they're over there looking at Google Maps. I mean, I could put a thing here and I could do something over here, but they don't ask the guy who's literally there at the river patrolling every day what's best for this area,
Right.
right? So I think that
A lot
as
of
an
them get
elected
in shock
official,
that the river is actually so narrow. They
yeah,
think it's the Rio Grande, that it's huge, that it's, I mean, not huge, but you know what I'm saying, wide. A lot of people. I
yeah,
remember I used to work for a maquila in Matamoros, and when we brought the white guys over from up north, they would be in shock. They'd be in shock. They couldn't believe that it was a simple little creek. They thought that it was the Rio Grande for grande, and that it was like huge, like the Mississippi. But that's not the case. So, all right,
yeah.
sir. Well, believe it or not, we went for an hour, and we had some interesting topics. I appreciate the fact you came on. I told you it wasn't going to be too bad.
I liked it
Uh,
a lot.
yeah, I really enjoyed our time tonight. We discussed some good issues, and we hope that you're back here. Now you're running in November, correct?
I'm in a runoff. I'm in
You're
a
in a
runoff.
runoff. Oh, that's right. You're in a runoff with Mr. Cortez.
Yes.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, he's been invited to the show, but I haven't heard from him yet. So,
No, it's always good to get a different perspective.
but yes, you're in a runoff. When is that runoff?
May 24th.
All right.
Yes.
And is there early voting?
There is early voting, and give me a second. Let me make sure I don't lie to you by accident. May 16th to the 20th is early voting.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, we definitely wish you the best of luck, and if you're successful on the 24th, we're going to welcome you back for some additional time. We'll be running probably all the way through November with interviews as the runoff candidates finally square off and everything gets settled. But if you are, lucky enough to, make it past 20th, you're more than welcome to come back. We'd love to have you. We love to have candidates with a different perspective about things. So I'm thankful that you were able to be on the show, and I'm pretty sure the viewers out there learned quite a lot about you. Honestly, I had not heard about you before, so but I'm glad that you came on, and we'll see you soon.
I want to say that I apologize. I get a little bit too down to the nitty gritty on these issues, and I may get a little bit boring. So
No, 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 no.
I do
There's nothing
apologize
wrong
for
with
that.
that. Believe it or not, I know I've had several candidates, and there's always a sense of nervousness. When you come online, when you come on the show in front of a camera, you don't know what to expect, but you did pretty good, and you're very thorough with your answers, which is a refreshing thing.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Well, everybody, this is Luis Villarreal. He is running for Texas State Representative for House District 37. There is a runoff in May. There is early elections, so get out there and make your choice heard. And once again, we're thanking Mr. Villarreal for joining us tonight. And we'll be on hopefully next week with another round of interviews. Luis, thank you.
Thank you.
Stay on for a few minutes.